As fans watched from around the world, Yonji took Vynnset to the top of last weekend's Battle Hardened in Salt Lake City. With plenty of games caught on stream to prove its mettle, let's take a deep dive into the list with the man himself.
I got so lucky this entire tournament, man.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Runaways YouTube channel. So today we're going to be doing a deck profile for the Vynnset deck that I took to a win at the Salt Lake City Battle Hardened. Before we jump into it, I want to give a shout out to our team sponsor, Fable Hunters. Check them out if you want to see, two guys just spreading good vibes and spreading their enjoyment of TCGs. We'll include a link in the description below. So getting into the deck, Vynnset is a Shadow Runeblade deck. So like Change, you can play cards from the Banish Zone, set up powerful turns, and if that's the type of gameplay that you're really interested in, then Vynnset might be a good choice to take a look at in either the Skirmish season or any other Blitz events that you want to attend in the future. Her strength is her hero ability, which lets her banish cards from her hand and create Runchant tokens. So the way that this interacts with Blood Deck cards is pretty powerful, and that's going to be the main engine, using her hero power to generate Runechants, and then playing cards that are discounted from having Runechants with the Rune Gate mechanic. The goal that I had when putting the Blitz deck together was to try to make the deck as consistent as possible, and the overall game plan was to attack with probably around 2 Rune Gate attacks, or like a Putrid Stirrings plus a Rune Gate attack at the beginning of the game, and coupled with some Runechants, that should be enough to put the opponent on the defensive, and then you can close the game out with mixed damage afterwards. There are basically 3 types of cards. So first we'll talk about the Blood Dead cards that you play. So you want to play all 3 pitches of Deathly Wail. And the reason why this is because it functions as both a Rune Gate attack and also as a Runechant generator. This is your best card in the entire deck because it lets you set up your future plays. And you want to ideally find a way to do damage to yourself when you play this card, so that you can get 2 Runechants out of the effect. Putrid Stirrings is a card that I decided to add kind of late in the process, and this is mostly for fatigue. It lets you put together another 5 damage onto a turn without having to use an action point, so you don't need an extender like Mob-Ridden Skies or Shadow Puppetry. And you also don't need to generate Runechants, so you can play this just using blue pitch. And the deck actually has like a decent number of blues, so it's just a way for you to utilize your resources and convert them into damage. And then to round out the mix, you have a couple of 2-cost Rune Gate attacks. And these are the easiest ones to cast, just because usually you can generate 1 Runechant off of your hero power, and then 1 Runechant by playing like an Envelope or Oath of the Arknight, or getting something off of your incantation, something like that. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the 2 most powerful Rune Gate cards, which are Widespread Destruction and Widespread Annihilation. And so Widespread Destruction hits your opponent's arsenal, and Widespread Annihilation hits their hand. And these are both pretty important to have in your deck to play early on in the game. Most of the time, you're going to be needing to use either Spellbound Creepers to creep in Read the Runes, or Vexing Coolhand, because they are pretty costly and they also don't generate Runechants themselves. But being able to take a card out of your opponent's next turn play is so powerful, especially in a format like Blitz, where maybe the games only lasts like 2 or 3 turns. And so being able to rip a card from their hand to reduce their overall damage output is very useful. And so these are all the Blood Deck cards that I'm choosing to play. The next kind of card that is useful in the deck is Runechant generators. So we have Read the Runes and Incantation, which kind of set up your future turn. And then we have all 3 pitches of Envelope and Darkness. This is to both power up your attack on your turn, and then also to be able to generate a Runechant so that you can play your Rune Gate card. And then 2 copies of Blue Oath of the Arknight. This is just a blue 3 block that also, generates a Runechant. Most of the time when you're going to be playing, Incantation is probably the most powerful of all of the Runechant generators, but also has the shortest window in which it's relevant. You really want to be playing this when you're going first, and also potentially when you go second on your first turn, but afterwards the window is pretty short. Envelopes and Darkness are always good because you can use them both with the Vynnset ability to take a damage to generate an extra Runechant off of your Deathly Whale after combat. And Oath of the Arknight is also just like a filler. Its power level is about the same as the blue Envelope in Darkness. Read the Runes is a card that is actually one of the most powerful cards potentially in the deck. You can defensively play this off of a Spellbound Creepers. You can play this off of Spellbound Creepers at the end of your attack turn to set up the Runechants that you need for your future turns. But basically 3 Runechants is the most that you'll ever need at the end of a turn, just because even if you're going to be playing the Annihilation, you can banish a card off the Vynnset ability and make the 4th one. So I think this is all the Runechant generators that I have right now. I didn't feel like it was important to include any more than this because I also wanted to make space for the last group of cards, last category of cards, which are extenders. And so we have Shadow Puppetry, Red and Blue Mavrian Skies. These all just give you an action point. Shadow Puppetry is useful also as a shadow action, non-attack action, because you can pay a life to make your Runechants unblockable. And then we have Pummel, which threatens extra damage, lets you utilize your extra resources, and threatens to take a card from your opponent. And I also included a copy of Oblivion. This is just to, put an ally on the field for a repeatable source of 6 damage. It's mostly important into fatigue strategies, but also can be quite good into Prism, for example. And then the last card that I had in my deck was a copy of Dread Triptych. I didn't include this in the same section as Runechant generators just because it's not as flexible as the rest. I think if I was to play the tournament again, I would probably replace this with a copy of Spellblade Assault, just as another, turn 0 play to make some Runechants. The next thing that I wanted to talk about for the deck profile is the equipment that I chose to play. So some people who are looking at the deck list as published might be a little bit confused on when to use all the equipments. I was also admittedly pretty confused at the time. I wanted to bring, since I had the space, we were playing without the new skirmish rules, so I didn't have space for a sideboard, so I just brought all the equipments that I thought would be useful. So the first thing we'll talk about is Vexing Quillhand is basically the reason why I decided to play Vynnset. And the type of gameplay that I wanted to create with this deck is something that I was able to very consistently put together a really strong turn in the first or second turn of the game by leveraging my equipment. So Vexing Quillhand lets you do that. It lets you make 2 Runechants at will. So 2 Runechants usually converts into 4 value because your Runechants discount your Runegate attacks, and then they also do damage. So this is probably the most crucial equipment piece. I would never switch this out for anything else. And then you have Spellbound Creepers and Sutcliffe Suede Hides as potential boots that you can use. Sutcliffe Suede Hides, I had some experience playing in the Krakow Calling in Viscerai Blitz, where it was a little bit more consistent than Spellbound Creepers and generating the extra action point, particularly if you wanted to open the turn by playing a non-attack action. So I thought for Vynnset, for example, if you wanted to start the turn by playing an Envelope in Darkness, then maybe you wanted to use Sutcliffe Suede Hides to get an extra action point and then play like another Runegate card with your Quill Hand. In practice, Spellbound Creepers usually does pretty much the same thing. There are some instances where I can say that Suede Hides would be better. For example, if you did need the Runechant off of the Envelope in order to play your first Runegate. It's something that has to get explored a little bit more. I found during the tournament that most of the time Spellbound Creepers ended up being better. And then so as the tournament went on, I just defaulted to using Spellbound Creepers more and more. Spellbound Creepers is super flexible. You can use it to creep in envelopes for more action points. You can creep in Marvin Skies. You can creep in Read the Runes either offensively or defensively to set up your next turn, or to, if you're blocking out and you need Rune Chance to play an attack that you already have banished. So I'm gonna say that most, like 95% of the time, you should be using Spellbound Creepers, and then Suede Hides potentially in some either really fast matchups or matchups where it's like a little bit more awkward to play and you need to use your Quill Hand really early. For chess pieces, we have Dyadic Carapace and Cairn Husk. I would say that most of the time you want to play Dyadic Carapace. Cairn Husk can be a real liability because it does have Blood Debt, and a lot of the times it can be difficult to get full value. If there are matchups where you find yourself, consistently blocking 6 with a Cairn Husk, then I mean the games are short enough in Blitz that you could probably get away with playing it. In practice, I found that probably like the only matchups where I wanted to play Cairn Husk instead of Dyadic Carapace would be something like Rhinar, where he could potentially threaten, like a huge hit after intimidating your whole hand away. Or perhaps for a deck like Dorinthia. I also found Cairn Husk to be pretty useful into Illusionist to block out, something like a Herald of Judgment or a Herald of Erudition. Dyadic Carapace is just an all-star. It has AB2, which is relevant even into Chain. It has Temper 2, and then so this is probably going to be what you're going to be using most of the time, just as, like an all-around defensive chess piece. You could probably play Tunic in the deck, but you might have to mess with the cost curves. Right now, the way that the deck is constructed, you don't really need an extra resource. I brought 3 hats to the tournament. I brought Skullcap, Ebonfold, and Crown of Providence. And so Skullcap I originally had in the deck primarily, I think, is for against Ninja, where the extra block is really useful. But I didn't really play any ninjas during the tournament, and so most of the time I just juggled between Ebonfold and Crown of Providence. Ebonfold is obviously useful for the Spell Void too, but I also found against Chain being a deck that you really want to try to close the game out early, that if I was going second, I really wanted to have the Ebonfold to banish a Blood Dead card from my hand. And then if I pitched a blue to Ebonfold, then I could use the extra 2 resources to, prevent arcane damage off of Rosetta Thorn Swing. And Crown of Providence, this is just probably like the best hat in the game currently, because it lets you cycle through your deck. Very important in Vynnset to cycle if you don't have any Blood Dead cards in your hand, because you really want to be banishing Blood Dead cards with her hero ability. The last thing is the weapon and offhand. So I was playing Flail of Agony almost exclusively. And Flail of Agony is really good because if you get your opponent really low at the end of the game, you can close the game out by playing like a Shadow Puppetry, taking a damage, attacking with Flail, and then you have the Rune Chance going, and that's like a 2 card to close the game out. It's also good if you give your attack Go Again. So for example, if you give a Deathly Wail Go Again with a Modern Skies, you can do damage to yourself with the Flail of Agony. And that lets you take damage to, get the extra effect off of the Deathly Wail. For offhands, I brought both Ornate Tessin and Grimoire. I did not play the staff that does an arcane damage just because I thought that Blitz was going to be too fast for me to ever really want to pay 2 resources to do 1 damage. And I didn't think that it would really come up. Grimoire of the Haunt, I think, is very useful to give Read the Runes Go Again potentially. And then also just for the Arcane Barrier text, I think is very helpful. It doesn't come up very often, but if you do ever draw Read the Runes, being able to give Read the Runes Go Again lets you probably play one of your most powerful turns, because you can creep that in. You can just play any 2 Rune Gate attacks guaranteed. Ornate Tessin, I played into, I think, Majin Bay on stream. If I was to do it again, I don't think I would play this into Chain or any matchup where I would be trying to use Arcane Barrier, but I did play it into some other matchups. Like I think I played it into Rhinar because I just needed to just prevent myself from bricking. So like any matchup that's pretty short, you really want to be able to dig for your Blood Deck cards. And so I think Ornate Tessin kind of does that job. Also, if you're using it with the ebb and fold on the same turn, it's also pretty useful. And so that's basically that's the deck. And I just wanted to spend some time talking about some of the matchups. So Fatigue is probably one of the hardest matchups, and I didn't really see that many Yojis. I don't think that there were that many present at the tournament, but I think into Fatigue, like, your best tools are going to be setting up a lot of rune chants with incantation, read the runes. You might have to do a lot of passing, and then playing in Oblivion. So the ideal turn sequence would be, let's say you stack up like 6 or more rune chants, and then you play a rune gate attack. Let's say you have Putrid Stirrings and a rune gate attack and an extender. So this is like really what you want to be doing. You want to be playing your rune gate attack with the Putrid Stirrings, giving it go again, making the 6/6, playing another rune gate attack off of the, the rune chants that you generate off of the Deathly Wail. So some combination of these things is what you really want to be aiming for. So you want to either be playing Putrid Stirrings, Deathly Wail, with like another rune gate attack, throwing all the rune chants, making a 6/6. Or let's say if you don't have Putrid Stirrings and instead you have an Envelope, then you can play Envelope, creep in the Shadow Puppetry, and then also attack with the Oblivion. And I don't know how effective this strategy is. In practice, I was able to pull it off, but sometimes the life gain that Yojis can get is a little bit too much. I think that Fatigue is probably your hardest matchup. Against aggro decks, it's a lot more straightforward. Your goal is basically to just banish, 2 Blood Deck cards at the beginning of the game. Ideally, you want to go first and say, let's say you have 2 Blood Deck cards banished. You find a way to make a rune chant. So let's say you play Envelope, you start the turn, you banish this, going first, then your opponent attacks, you banish another Blood Deck card, you start off with an Envelope, you pay a life, you Deathly Wail, or you play Deathly Wail, you creep in an Envelope, if you have a go again, and then the Envelope lets you pay a life, so you end up with 2 rune chants, and then you get to attack with the Phantom Wraith for 9. This is attacking for, like 3, 9, 10 from the rune chants, plus 2, 12, plus another 9. So you're attacking for, 21 off of basically 4 cards. This is like the reason why Vynnset can be really powerful. So being able to put together, like 21 damage off of 4 cards plus a blue is really strong. And you just want to kind of ride off of the back of this momentum swing to win the game. The best cards that you could be playing into aggro as far as attacks, again, we talked about earlier, are going to be your Widespread Destruction and Widespread Annihilation. So don't be afraid to use your Quill Hand. Let's say if you have a turn where you can attack with the Deathly Wail, you make 2 rune chants, and then you have this in Banish. Just use the Quill Hand and play these out, because then you get to also take a card from your opponent. And then into Wizard, you kind of want to be doing the same thing, but I think you're actually pretty strong into Wizard because you have access to basically Spell Void 2 plus AB4. And I think that potentially if I was going to play this again, maybe you could also play Dance of Darkness here, so you can have Spell Void 4. Vynnset doesn't have access to as much Go Again, so you have to test for yourself to see whether or not you can output enough damage without having creepers, but I think you could probably get there. So I think Vynnset's quite strong into Wizard or Kano. And then I thought that Prism would also be one of the harder matchups. So Prism, mostly you want to rely on 2 things. You want to rely on the fact that your Spellbound Creepers can give you an extra action point. Vynnset's ability triggers at the beginning of the turn, so you can't really respond to it with Arclight Sentinel. So the most ideal sequence would be something like after you have, 2 things set up in your banish zone, to just start the turn by attacking with a Deathly Wail. And then if you attack with Deathly Wail, then you're already throwing the 9 damage at your opponent. If they Arclight Sentinel you, then whatever, you can creep in the Envelope in Darkness, save the Phantom Wraith, and then hit it with your weapon. You know, if they don't respond to it, then you can creep in the Envelope in Darkness, you get an extra action point if they blocked, and then you get to attack again. And being able to just like threaten, you really want to put a lot of pressure on your opponent at the very beginning of the game. Once you get your opponent below, let's say like 7 or 8 life, it's really hard for them to play out auras anymore. But if they catch you with Arclight Sentinel, so sometimes you have to play into the Arclight Sentinel. Let's say if you banish a Putrid Stirrings, you kind of like forced to play this at the beginning of the turn. It is one of the harder matchups because you have to play into the Arclight Sentinel a lot of the times. So just make sure that you keep that in mind. You try to set up plays where, you know, you can play around and you can throw the damage first before they Arclight you, and to use Spellbound Creepers, you know, to get extra action points. And then the last piece of gameplay advice I would say is that you just like always want to go first. You always want to be banishing an extra card. Really, the strength of the deck is being able to banish a Blood Deck card at the beginning of the game when your opponent doesn't have anything, any kind of like response to make you block. If you win the dice roll, you go first. Sometimes if you lose the dice roll, if your opponent doesn't know what Vynnset does, they also let you go first. And I hope you guys have a lot of fun playing Vynnset, and we'll include a link to the deck list in the description. So happy games, everyone, and I'll see you guys on the next one.